SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, my name is Amrita Shah, and this course is called Appreciating and Writing Popular English Non-Fiction Books. The title for Lecture 2 is What is Popular Non-Fiction? About literary genres and popular appeal. Before I come to today's subject, let me briefly recall the contents of Lecture 1, which was an introduction to the course which we are doing right now. Titled Why, the course introduction was titled Why Popular English Nonfiction. As I have said before, this is an elective course for students of communication at the MA level, but it has potential benefits for students across disciplines. And who would be interested in this course? Again, as I said the last time, whether you are a voracious reader, an aspiring writer, a journalist or an aspiring journalist, a concerned citizen, a curious citizen, someone keen on self-improvement through books, or someone with a passion such as gardening, politics, anything at all, something that you are interested and keen on sharing with the world in the form of a book. This course is for you, for any one of you. In this course, as I said, we will talk about books, about the pleasures of reading and developing a taste in books, and about the crafting of a book. In other words, what goes into the making of a book. That is, whether you're writing or whether you want to read or whether you want to develop an interest in books or whether you want to distinguish between good or bad books or develop some kind of opinions about books. This course will help you to do that, not only by introducing you to books and titles and authors, but also introducing you to the how-to of the book, the crafting of a book. Now, we're not talking here about all books, of course. We're talking about popular English non-fiction. In Lecture 1, we talked about what this might mean and suggested that popular non-fiction books are books that are in some form or the other factual accounts of the world in which we live. Short definition. Today we are going to kind of discuss this, of course, in greater detail. There is, of course, much more to say on the subject. But I just wanted to kind of revise what we did the last time because we started in a certain way, and I want to try and kind of link up what we're going to talk about today with what we did the last time. So in the last lecture, we made a beginning by talking about popular non-fiction books in the context of news and current affairs. I suggested that popular non-fiction books could add value to our understanding of news and current affairs, particularly at a time when we are bewildered and confused and often left uninformed because of the sheer excess of news and information. We discussed that the last time, the media explosion and how much media is available to us today. And yet it sometimes feels that we lack perspective to understand things that are going on around us, events of significance. Okay, we talked about how popular non-fiction books can provide an immersive, unified, focused, and credible experience of events of current importance. Okay, these are the words that we kind of used, and again I want to emphasize them: immersive, unified, focused, and credible. Each one is kind of a loaded and important term. But today we will talk more about popular non-fiction as a literary undertaking, right? So the last time we made a beginning, as I said, with news and current affairs, but popular non-fiction, of course, is a kind of very wide area and covers a much greater kind of arena than news and current affairs. But it's a good beginning because, as we said, popular non-fiction, the shortcut definition is that it is factual and it is about the real world. Okay, so today we will talk about nonfiction as a literary undertaking. We will see how it differs from other types of literary undertakings or genres, and we will try and specify what we mean by popular nonfiction. Okay, so popular nonfiction as a literary undertaking. What do we mean by that? Now, often, when people approach books and reading, they do not pay much attention to the kind of books they like. They might not even notice that they like some kinds of books more than others. Very often, they don't make these distinctions. Or some make them and make them in a very kind of generic way, So they say, "Oh, okay, I like I like books about real things. I don't like stories so much, or I only like stories and I don't like factual books, and so on." The point of this course is to break down all these various categories to try and show the variety that exists, so that one is introduced to each kind of each genre in a more detailed manner. And this again helps you appreciate it more. It's not necessary. You could enjoy books without knowing all these things. But the enjoyment, I suggest, is much greater when you know something about the kind of various forms of categorization, the how-to of it all. How do you craft this particular book versus that particular book, so on and so forth. Okay, so as I said, people generally do not, most times do not pay attention to what they're reading and what they like or what they don't like, and also how one kind of book differs in type from the other. People might in fact instinctively be fond of one type of book or the other, but will rarely articulate that difference. They will just sort of prefer to articulate a fondness for just reading in general. But there are distinct types of literary works. Not all books are the same. They fall into distinct genres. So now here is this word, genre. What is genre? What do we mean when we say genre? Well, genre is a sort of French, comes from the French word which means kind or sort. It's a distinctive type of or category of literary composition. Okay, literary genres are categories, types, or collections of literature. Genre, a distinctive type or category of literary composition, and literary genres being categories, types, or collections of literature. Now, the genre, of course, as we know, we are focusing on is popular nonfiction. And of course, our subject is popular nonfiction books in English. Now, what do I mean by popular nonfiction books in English? Funnily enough, before we talk about what it is, before we talk about what popular nonfiction books in English are, we are actually going to say what it is not. This might seem like a roundabout way of going about things. And to the experienced readers here, it might seem like delving into the basics, and I apologize, but we do have a diverse audience here. So I want to kind of make sure we cover, we try and cover as many different kinds of viewers that we have here. So if it seems a little basic, then let's go with it. Even if it is basic, it is a necessary step, I think, for many reasons. First of all, a brief discussion on literary genres, and that's all we're going to do here. We're not going to delve in great detail into all these literary genres. We're just going to introduce them just enough to be able to distinguish our particular genre from these other genres. So, first of all, as I said, this discussion on literary genres gives us a sort of, it'll give us a background and a context within which we can place popular nonfiction. Okay, so background and context is important, so that we can figure out where we kind of fit into this large area of literature. Second, it allows us this kind of approach where we say what popular nonfiction is not rather than what it is. I mean, if we start with saying what it is not, and we're talking about other literary genres, it is very, very useful, as you will see in the following discussions, as what it allows us is not only to clarify how popular nonfiction differs from other genres, but it also allows us to borrow from those genres. Okay, so this is important. As I said, first of all, this discussion right now about what popular nonfiction is not is important in setting rules and guidelines for writing nonfiction. So you know that this is nonfiction. This is where it fits into this. This is what it is not. This is what you do not do. But it also helps us, and it will, as you will see, helps us to know what we can do, how we can adapt, how we can um, pull good things from other genres and use them in our genre. That takes a lot more experience, of course, and we are right now at a very kind of early stage in our conversation. But you will see as we go along how it matters. So, as I said, a brief discussion on literary genres is important in setting rules and guidelines for writing nonfiction, but it also allows us to see what we can learn and apply from other genres. So, let us proceed and consider some well-known literary genres. So, I'm going to start with something that most of us know. I think most of us have some awareness of poetry through nursery rhymes early in life. I mean, right from the time a child is very small, parents, grown-ups talk to them in rhymes, teachers talk to them in rhymes. So they learn very early the kind of, they learn about how words can be used, they learn how words match each other, one word sounding like another in a rhyme. They kind of hear the tune of the rhyme. So they kind of learn very early to respond to poetry. Okay, but as you grow up, you might come to see that poetry is far more complex and difficult to grasp. It's not as simple as a nursery rhyme, and very often I find, at least, that people tend to run away from poetry. They get very intimidated by it. When one has to learn about it in school, one does, and then a lot of people get kind of afraid of it. And I think that, well, poetry is a very rewarding endeavor and extremely enriching, but that is not my subject, so I will hope that you would attempt to read poetry. But right now we are not talking about poetry. Luckily for those who are so scared and intimidated by poetry, this course is not about poetry. But as I said, again, it is useful to understand classification and genres of literature, even if you are not going to enter them. This information and background will be useful when we talk of style and form later. Very important, in fact. As I mentioned just now, the rhyming, the use of words, the use of various techniques such as alliteration, the kind of rhythmic form of poetry, and so on. So let's take a quick look at some definitions of poetry. Okay, I've just pulled up a couple of poems, the opening lines. These are the opening lines of two poems. One is Daffodils by William Wordsworth, a very famous poem. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. It's a very popular poem, and I'm sure most of you have come across it somewhere or the other. The other poem is called The Bangle Sellers. It's by the Indian poet Sarojini Naidu. Bangle sellers are we who bear our shining loads to the temple fair. Who will buy these delicate, bright, rainbow-tinted circles of light, lustrous tokens of radiant lives for happy daughters and happy wives? Again, you might have studied this poem in school. You might be familiar with Sarojini Naidu's other works. But I've chosen these deliberately. These are older poems, and I've chosen them deliberately because they're fairly well known, and hopefully you might have some familiarity with them. Okay, look at these lines and you get some sense of what this genre might be. So I leave you with this for a minute to look at the lines, to just read them by yourself. Okay. So let us now look at some definitions of poetry. Okay. Poetry is a type of literature that uses language's aesthetic and rhythmic qualities to evoke meanings. Okay, aesthetic and rhythmic qualities. Poetry is the extraordinary perception of the ordinary. Okay, extraordinary perception of the ordinary. Poetry can be structured with rhyming lines and meter, or it can be free form, which follows no formal structure. Poetry uses figurative language and carefully crafted verses. Poetry tells a story in a concentrated lyrical arrangement of words. I will leave you again to read these lines by yourself for a little while. So as you can see, there is a great emphasis on form in poetry. Poetry is preoccupied also with aesthetics and on exploiting the visual and oral power of words and composition as much as it is with the expression of ideas. Okay, so form, aesthetics, the visual appeal, the oral appeal, the power of words and composition, and the expression of ideas. All of these things are what poetry is preoccupied with. And I ask you to kind of keep this in mind as we move forward, even though we are not talking about poetry. Poetry is not our subject for today. Okay? Let us now come to another well-known literary genre, which we will call the script. Now, we are considering the script for the purposes of this lecture. I'm considering the script with references to both plays and films, though the script for a film is often referred to also as the screenplay. Here are some common definitions of script and screenplay. I've put them together. A play script is a written version of a theatrical performance. It is used to prepare for a performance and contains all the lines and stage directions for the actors to perform. Play scripts are split into different acts, which are sections of the play that detail different parts of the story. A screenplay is a written work that outlines the actions, dialogue, and movements of characters for a film, television show, or other moving media. I leave you with this for a minute, read through it, get the point of it. Okay, so in plays and screenplays, as you can see, the emphasis is on performance. The text is only a starting point for an exercise that involves actors, sets, lights, a stage or a camera, etc. Okay, there is dialogue and movement and a setting. It could be a drawing room or a city street or whatever, where things happen. A plot unfolds, right? So this is just the beginning. The script is just the beginning for what is eventually mounted, which involves a whole lot of other elements like actors and sets and lights, a stage, a camera. This is just the beginning. It's just the kind of first block on which everything else is mounted. And as we've seen, the emphasis is on the dramatic. Again, as I said, dramatic performance, keep that in mind because that will again be useful when we later talk about style in popular non-fiction, right? So again, the script is not, we're not talking about popular non-fiction here, but we will keep the emphasis on performance and on the dramatic in mind as we proceed. Okay, the next category that we come to now is fiction. Okay. Now, I think this is probably a form that most of us are familiar with. We all grew up with stories. Stories are read to us as when we're children, when we learn to read. Most of us have at some point or the other read or have had a story read to us or have read stories, read many stories. We might have been familiar with folk tales. We might have heard seen very kind of very familiar mythological stories. In some form or the other, we are all aware of what fiction is. And yet, I have in fact found that people very often don't actually know how to define fiction. They read it, they like it, but they don't quite distinguish what it is. And since this is a course about writing and reading, we are going to take a little more effort and try and break down these categories. So, when we speak of fiction, what generally comes to mind are novels and short stories. Okay, again, let us look at some definitions. Fiction is a literary work that is based on imagination rather than fact. Imagination rather than fact. Fiction can be a deliberately fabricated account of something. Deliberately fabricated. Fiction can refer to something feigned, invented, or imagined. The act of feigning, inventing, or imagining an imaginary thing or event postulated for the purposes of argument or explanation. Okay, so look at the words that pop out over here. Imagination rather than fact, deliberately fabricated account, something feigned, invented, or imagined, the very act of feigning, inventing, or imagining, an imaginary thing or event. Okay, deliberately postulated. Okay, two other definitions are useful. The term fiction is generally used in reference to creative works written in prose or ordinary language which does not follow a meter, as in poetry. The Latin word fictus means to form, which seems like a good source for the English word fiction, since fiction is formed in the imagination. So here again, creative works written in prose, so distinguishing from poetry, which here prose or ordinary language which does not follow a meter necessarily as in poetry. And again, the Latin word fictus meaning to form. We are talking about fiction being formed in the imagination, right? So far what have we talked about? We're talking about feigning, imagining, not fact, basically fabricating, which is another word for making up something. So we see, as I said, fiction is written in prose, which means that it does not use the form that we discussed with regard to poetry. You recall how in poetry the lines are metered and formed verses, while here you just have continuous lines of text and paragraphs. The second definition is important and tallies all the definitions tally with, as I said, the kind of idea of making up something, fabricating something. In essence, actually lying, you can say, but lying, of course, not in a bad way, but lying for a certain purpose, for creating a story. So now that we have talked, so this is, I think, for the moment, these are the kind of genres that I wanted to put before you. We talked about poetry, we talked about script, and we've talked about fiction. These are the kind of well-known popular genres that we need to be aware of. All these are not what popular non-fiction is, and as I said, we need to know them. They will be valuable for contextualizing popular non-fiction, but also, as I said, later when we come to style, we will see how we can borrow from each of these. Okay, so now that we have talked about genres and listed a few well-known literary genres, it is time to approach our subject. And as I said, for those who have sat through wondering why we have been talking about all the genres that do not concern us before coming to our subject, thank you for your patience. The value of appreciating the many genres of literature will become clear as we proceed step by step on our journey. But we are getting close now. So as we come to the genre that we are concerned with, which is the genre of non-fiction. Now let us look at some broad definitions of non-fiction. Non-fiction is a broad genre of writing that provides information based on facts and the author's research or expertise. Non-fiction reading provides knowledge, new perspectives on and insights into both historical and current affairs, and a greater understanding of our world. Non-fiction is a literary work in which the content is based on fact. Non-fiction writing is not made up or imaginary. In other words, it is not fiction. Non-fiction is prose writing that presents and explains ideas or tells us about real people, places, objects, or events. So, in different ways, we are being told about non-fiction here. Okay, that it is prose writing, that means it's not poetry. Of course, there is a form of poetry called prose poetry, but we're not going to go into that. Really, the kind of, we're trying to draw sort of broad distinctions between these various literary genres here. So, non-fiction is prose that presents and explains ideas or tells us about real people, places, objects, or events. Real people, places, objects, or events, which means that the real is important. Real versus the imaginary, which is the content of fiction, right? Also, other definitions talk about providing knowledge, new perspectives, and insights into historical and current affairs, and a greater understanding of our world. You could say that fiction and poetry also do some of this, but here again, I want to stress a greater understanding of our world, which means again that we're talking about the world around us. This is not a fabricated world. What we're talking about is fact-based and real. Okay, so information, facts, the author's research or expertise, these are all useful terms and words to keep in mind as we proceed. Okay, now that we have talked about what popular non-fiction is not in terms of literary genres, and we have come to popular non-fiction, let us now look at the many kinds of writing that could qualify for the definition of popular non-fiction. So, newspapers, magazines, television documentaries. I mean, you could well say that these are popular non-fiction, and yes, certainly these are examples of non-fiction writing, in the sense that newspapers, of course, and magazines are writing, and television documentaries will have a script that would be a form of popular non-fiction. But today we are going to talk about books, so we are not going to talk about newspapers, magazines, television documentaries, though the elements and the features that we discuss in the following lectures will, all these should be useful. They should enrich our understanding of how we can write a script, for instance, for a television documentary, or how to write a better news report, or how to write a very good feature article for a magazine. All these will feed into that, but they are not the subject of our course. Okay, but it is again useful to keep in mind the techniques of newspapers, techniques used by newspapers, magazines, and television documentaries. Things like, for instance, urgency, or a certain kind of way of engaging the reader. I'm not going to go into that deeply, because this is not, as I said, the media is not the current news is not what we are talking about. But we should keep what we know about newspapers, magazines, television documentaries in mind, because they are useful. Some techniques again can be borrowed for the writing of books. Okay, okay. What else can be considered popular non-fiction? Blogs, social media posts. Certainly, again, you could talk about these as popular non-fiction. In fact, these are currently what most of us are engaged in, whether we are writers or not writers. Most people now are using the internet and using social media to put out things they see, whether it just could be your holiday pictures, or it could be the account of a trip that you took from one place to another, or something you're angry about. We have all become we've all become, what's the word that I could use? We all become writers of a sort at this level. We're all using these new tools that the internet has given us to put out our views, to to engage with people who have similar views, to showcase facts about ourselves, and so on and so forth. And since they deal mostly with facts and the real world, one presumes that when you're stating that you went on a holiday somewhere, you actually did go. Of course, there is a lot of lying there too, but presumably we are talking about facts and the real world. So yes, this is also non-fiction, and of course it's popular because I mean, it is in the arena where the general public, we're kind of communicating with lay people, not specialists. But they're not books. So here is a distinction, and we will keep in mind the kind of, because each new form of communication does something to language, does something to the way we write, the way we talk, and so we do need to learn from all these. We should not just sort of discard them. We will keep these in mind as we go ahead, even though we're not focusing on these forms of writing. Okay, some more forms of what could be thought of as popular non-fiction: yellow pages and instruction manuals. By yellow pages, of course, I mean what now could be an internet search, for products or places, or we're constantly doing that, right? We're constantly looking for things on the net, whether it's restaurants, or whether it's a traffic situation, or whether it's the weather and how cold or warm some places. And if you're traveling, then you know what kind of clothes to carry and so on. Real world information, facts, right? So this is non-fiction. I mean, we're talking about facts and the real world. But again, these cannot be the subject of our study here, because again, we're discussing books, and the book is a specific thing. So we will not be talking about these various areas of non-fiction, though they do constitute non-fiction. So books, non-fiction, popular non-fiction books, that is the subject that we are concerned with. Now, so far we started by saying these are the literary genres that non-fiction is not. Then we said this is non-fiction, but we are not going to talk about these various things like internet searches and yellow pages and blogs and social media posts. So now we come down to a further kind of a more finer definition, which is that we're talking about popular non-fiction books. What do we mean by popular? Okay, we're talking about non-fiction books, but we're also talking about popular non-fiction books. So when I'm saying in this context, when I say popular, I do not necessarily mean that they should sell large numbers. Textbooks sell large numbers, as do instruction manuals for microwave ovens, for instance. But they are not of interest to a general reading audience, right? You don't read them for pleasure. I mean, you read them for a very specific purpose that has to do with a product you have bought, or and to understand the product you have bought, or to understand a subject because you are a student and you have to give an exam in that. So we are not going to be discussing textbooks and instruction manuals, for instance, because as I said, even though they sell large numbers, they do not constitute popular as in a popular appeal to a mainstream audience, to a general audience, which reads books for pleasure or instruction and information at a far kind of more layperson's level. Okay, so textbooks and most academic books. Some academic books do make the transition between academia and the popular and mainstream. And some of the examples I will give we will talk about these. And that transition is usually because the writer writes in a style that that goes beyond a specialist niche audience, that goes beyond an academic audience to go further into a mainstream audience and becomes popular in the sense that fits into in the way we are kind of looking at our subject. Okay, but textbooks that are prescribed and strictly academic works are not what we are going to talk about. So finally, now we come to our subject. After discussing for a long time what does not constitute popular nonfiction, let us come to what does fit into our definition. Yeah, as we saw above, so far we have kind of said again and again, nonfiction deals in facts and is about real people, places, objects, or events. So this is a kind of sort of final word to take forward, that this is what popular non-fiction that we are going to be talking about is. Okay. Popular non-fiction books come in various formats, which are also genres and subgenres in themselves. So now, sorry, I should backtrack a bit. Now that we have decided what is popular non-fiction, then let us now come to discussing popular non-fiction books. This is our subject. We have now come to the subject itself, and now I'm going to give you a sort of slight introduction to the various formats that do constitute popular non-fiction books. Okay, because they themselves, in fact, they are also genres and subgenres in themselves, but they come within the purview of popular non-fiction, and so we can discuss them in greater detail. So let us start by taking a look at the most common formats of popular non-fiction. Okay, just to give you a list, these are some of the popular non-fiction formats, and I'm sure at some point or the other you have come across all of them or some of them. And again, as I said, when people read, very often or most times, they do not actually think that, oh, I am reading X kind of book, or they do not actually think about style or genre or craft, or they do not make these distinctions. They just read the book. They say, oh, I read a book. Oh, I read a nice book. But we are going to, as I said, discuss this and in far more detail. And so within popular non-fiction, these are the most popular categories. There is popular non-fiction is a really wide area, and there are other kinds of books that will come into this, and we will be discussing them. But for the moment, let's just look at these. Autobiography, biography, essays, informative, articles, interviews, travel, adventure. I've put in articles over here and interviews over here just in case sometimes you have collections of articles and collections of interviews. Travel, adventure, how-to, self-help. Let's look at, so as I said, we will discuss each category in much greater detail. But I want to showcase a few examples of these formats to kind of give you an introduction to what we're going to be talking about. Again, I have chosen, since again this is we're still early in the process of this course, I've chosen older, well-known books which are likely to evoke familiar memories. But we will be looking at a mix, and even here I have chosen some new books. So there is a mix of Indian and international titles and old and new books. So here we go with autobiography. Autobiography is the story of a person's life told by that person. Okay, in the last lecture we talked about, I talked about Gandhi's autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, which was, as I said, a very rare autobiography in its time. Indians were not prone really to writing autobiographies that much. Then we have Andre Agassi's, this is a very popular book called Open. Then you have Varghese Kurian's book, I Too Had a Dream. He's the founder of Amul, the Amul Cooperative. And you have the famous poet Kamala Das, her book called My Story. All very different examples, but I wanted to show you, they're different because they belong to different eras, they belong to different fields. There's sort of men and a woman, an older person, someone more contemporary, a sports person, an activist, a political activist, a poet. So you can see that the sharing of a life is autobiography is really a very, very popular genre of nonfiction, and people want to hear from people. People want to hear stories about people. People want to know. People want to be inspired by people. So this is a popular genre. Then let me talk about another genre, which is memoir. Um, This is a record of events written by a person having intimate knowledge of them and based on personal observation. Um, Now, I'm kind of, there is some kind of overlap between autobiography and memoir. Sometimes, one doesn't quite know how to differentiate between them. But I think one could say that a memoir very often could be a very intense experience of a certain event, and the person's sort of retelling of that event is the focus, rather not necessarily the person's whole life, which of course it could also be the person's whole life. But so for instance, this book that I have pulled out, Wave, is a very, very beautiful story about a woman who lost her family in the tsunami, and she brings them, she kind of evokes each person that she lost with great beauty and love. It's a beautiful, beautiful story, kind of woven out of a tragedy. But it's not, as I say, it's not an autobiography, though it is autobiographical, because it's not her whole life story, but it is about this particular event. Next, we look at biography, which is a written account of a person's life. It can be about a person who is still alive or someone who lived centuries ago. Or it could be even about a group of people or a place. Here we have, for instance, a book on Bethlehem, and then we have a biography of a failed venture. So talking about a venture itself, which could be a kind of business venture, or it could be about some kind of cooperative undertaking. You have Steve Jobs, of course, very well known contemporary personality, and you have Gauhar Jan, who is a musician of another era. All these very different people, but again, each life is so sort of full of a world and a whole atmosphere, and which is why, again, like autobiographies, biographies also are an extremely popular format and genre, and people love reading biographies. But of course, there are writers who write biographies, only biographies, in fact. But and there are some writers who have written one particular biography and left it at that. Okay, this is the essay. I mean, these are books. There is one collection of great English essays, but the other two are books that are extended essays. So how do we define an essay? An essay is an analytic, interpretive or critical literary composition. It's usually much shorter and less systematic and formal than a dissertation or thesis, which as students you might be familiar with. And it usually deals with its subject from a limited and often personal point of view. Okay. So as you can see, these are all arguments, temptations of the West, how to be modern in India and beyond. Arundhati Roy's book, My Seditious Heart. And then you have these great English essays by great stylists and great essayists of the past. The author's purpose usually in an essay is, it could be to inform, to entertain, to persuade, or to express an opinion. There is another subgenre called the personal essay, where the writer kind of spins a kind of a very thoughtful, reflective piece of writing from his or her own experiences, and which is not necessarily full of quotes and so on, which is what we normally think of an essay as. And we will talk about the personal essay as we go along, but I will just leave you with this introduction for the moment. The next genre is self-help books. Again, something that we're all familiar with. In the last lecture, I talked about Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is another edition of the same book. Um, there are other books, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, Ikigai, again a very well-known book, The Freedom Manifesto by Karan Bajaj, 7 Rules to Live the Life of Your Calling. As you can see, how-to books have great appeal because they seem to kind of hold the promise of solving problems or improving lives. And that's what kind of one tends to look at a self-help book for. Similar to self-help, I mean, self-help when we talk about is usually kind of, you're talking about psychology or spirituality or some way of understanding how to improve your life, do better, in ways that are internal, where you kind of learn from these books to work on yourself. But there is another format which is a how-to book. I mean, earlier I talked about Dale Carnegie's book, which has how to in its title, though I put it in the self-help section. But there is some sort of, I guess there would be some overlap between a how-to and self-help book. So sometimes, one could be both or either. But the examples I pulled out here are How to Cook Indian, How to Grow Fresh Air. So these are more kind of hands-on examples of more sort of hands-on hobbies or things that you want to actually do. There's a great deal of interest in the environment, in doing things that can kind of in recycling, for instance, or or using waste management and things like that, and books that tell you how to. I mean, you might want to do something, but you need help in understanding techniques or the kind of various means that exist for you to put them into practice, right? How to Cook Indian. You might want to, you might be a new cook, just learning how to cook, and you want to learn recipes and so on. So this could be of some help over there. Okay, these are kind of a general listing of books. As I said, we're going to be talking about different titles and different genres and subgenres as we go along. So I've just kind of made a list over here. Books on phenomena, what do I mean by that? Mostly I mean research-oriented books. Here you kind of packing in a lot of facts. You're presenting maybe a new argument, or you are explaining something that people know, but or a new finding. It could be a new finding in science, or a new, or it could be a kind of major political trend that you're trying to describe. So these would tend to be research-oriented books, and I'm just, put this sort of word phenomena to describe that. Adventure books, again, very popular. This could include anything. It could be someone, traveling around the world with very little money and encountering all kinds of adventures along the way. It could be, climbing mountains. It could be someone overcoming some kind of obstacle, someone chasing an animal, a wild animal like the snow leopard. It could be a whole range of titles would come into this category. Then books on history. I think this is kind of self-explanatory. Books on history could be any era of history, and it could be the styles would vary wildly. Again, history books are very, very, very popular. You could have medieval, it could be any period of history. It could be medieval, it could be ancient, it could be modern history, it could be books based in India, it could be books based abroad, it could be books based in a certain part of the world. It could be about a person, I mean, again, there's of course possible overlap with biography, because we could talk about that book following either in biography or history and could combine the two subgenres. And then we're talking about books by specialists. Again, all these categories will overlap with each other. But when I say books by specialists, what I mean is that books that are written by people who are known to be specialists in a certain field. Okay, then we talk about travel books, self-explanatory again. Humor, very, very popular, and I don't need to tell you what that is. And then books on the economy, politics, and society. So here I've kind of just pulled out again a selection of books that are quite well known, and you can decide for yourself. You might, where they fit, what they fit into. So you have How Prime Ministers Decide by Neerja Chaudhary, you have Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future by Raghuram Rajan and Rohit Lamba. You have Dongri to Dubai, a book on the Mumbai underworld by S. Hussain Zaidi. And you have Landscapes of Loss, The Story of an Indian Drought, which is a book on the agricultural field by Kavita Iyer. Okay, so we will be talking about various types of book with more examples the following lectures. This is just a kind of selection of a few books to introduce the subject. Okay, so now for your homework, at the end of lecture 1, I suggested that, wait on this for a moment, I just want to sort of reiterate what we talked about the last time. At the end of lecture 1, I suggested that you become comfortable with books, or if you are already a reader, then revisit your books, both familiar and new. And I will repeat this assignment and add to it, because I still want you to read and revisit books familiar and new. But what I would suggest you do now is look at books from the perspective of genre and format. Look at books of poetry, look at novels, fiction books, as I said, autobiographies, biographies, books on science, books on technological innovations, books by journalists, self-help books, so on and so forth. So look at a wide range of books and try and now see if you can recognize, use what we have talked about today about genres, about literary genres like poetry, like fiction. What I said non-fiction is not. Look, if you're watching a film, then think about the script, and again say, you can kind of, that this is not what popular non-fiction is. That's not what we're talking about here. And yet, if you can start distinguishing and understanding the idea of genre itself, the idea of a literary genre, even if it is not the genre that we are concerned with, as I said, it will help you going along when we talk about style. And then look at books, look at non-fiction books and say, oh, this is an autobiography, not just non-fiction, or not just a book. This is an autobiography, or this is a biography. And what does that mean? What does it mean, an autobiography? An autobiography, as I said before, is a book written by a person about himself or herself. What is a memoir? Again, we talked about memoir a little earlier, where we said that it is a person talking about himself or herself, but a particular event, a concentrated account. Well, look at biographies, and then look at other kinds of books. Look at books by subject, science, technology, books by journalists, self-help books, so on and so forth. Okay. Now coming to the homework today. Read, as always. Read. Look at books, at covers, and look at back flaps. Start looking at the back of books. Read what is written about the book. Read it with interest and focus. It will tell you a bit about the content, it will tell you a bit about the genre, and it will tell you about the writer. All these are important things when you're trying to evaluate a book, what it is not, whether you should read it or not. What we talked about developing taste, about inculcating taste. Okay, look at books from the perspective of genre and format. Look at books of poetry. Again, I'm going to repeat this: novels, autobiographies, biographies, books on science, books on technological innovations, books by journalists, self-help books, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is our lecture today. Now, in our next lecture, in lecture 3, we will be looking at how book ideas are born. How is a book born? How is a book project conceived? So, as you can see, we are kind of already moving deeper into craft, right? I mean, I talked in the beginning in lecture 1 about how this course is designed to kind of take into account a very varied and very diverse group of viewers. So, whether you're a reader or an aspiring reader, whether you're an aspiring journalist or a writer, an aspiring writer, or just someone who wants to know what books are all about, what maybe someone who just wants to inculcate an interest in reading and wants to start somewhere and does not know where to start. Okay, so we started with a very kind of general discussion on books and news and current affairs. We kind of went into literary genres and how to distinguish, how to fit popular nonfiction into this idea of literary genres, and then we looked at what is popular in nonfiction, and we also looked at books versus other forms of nonfiction, which we are not going to be talking about, right? And now, having gone through that entire gamut and come down to popular nonfiction. And oh yes, one more thing I need to say, need to reiterate, is the fact that we are talking only about English books. We have kind of restricted ourselves to that, not because there are some wonderful books written in the regional Indian languages. There are some fantastic books written in languages, in international languages that are not English, but we have to kind of put some limits on our discussion, and so this is the limits that we're going to put. I am discussing books in translation. I mean, if the book is available in an English translation, such as Gandhi's books, some of which were written in Gujarati, and the English translation is available, then we are talking about those. So those will form part of our subject. But as you can see in lecture 3, looking at these subjects, how is a book born? How is a book project conceived? We are already moving into craft. Now, this is of great interest and very valuable to aspiring writers and writers. But even for a reader, as I have said before, it is important to understand craft. It is important to understand what goes into the making of a book. It helps you value a book more. It helps you appreciate a book more. I mean, this course is about appreciating and writing popular English nonfiction books. So whether you want to just appreciate or just, I mean, if you write, then it is likely that you are also a reader and appreciate nonfiction too. But as I said, we are learning how to appreciate books and understanding how a book moves forward right from the beginning. This is the very birth of a book. How is a book born? Moving forward from there, understanding what goes into a making of a book will help us to appreciate books better. So with this, I will conclude lecture 2, what is popular nonfiction? And this is in the course, of course, that we are doing, appreciating and writing popular English nonfiction books. So thank you and look forward to meeting you again.